Waharaka, Thera Waruna, Wajrāsana,
the undefiable Dhamma.
How to restrain the sensual thoughts that arise from time to time. If we have understood the truth, there won't be the requirement to restrain anything. If the truth has been understood, the restraint would have already been achieved. Because we haven't understood the truth, we can't restrain the sensual thoughts. When we contemplate the truth as it is, we are incurred with the wisdom diminishing avidya. The difficulty of restraining the sensual thoughts stems from the magnitude of avidya. Is everything called the requirement to restrain sensual thoughts? If the avidya is diminished, there won't be anything to control. If the avidya is present, then there would be no point in controlling. So what should be done? The reason why we are attracted to sensuality and why we are unable to restrain sensuality is a perceived worth in sensuality. We have to see whether this view that we have over the sensuality is true or false. We have to contemplate regularly as to how the delusion of asada is made and how the suffering is fabricated by that delusion. We call this the Vidarshana meditation. When we master the Vidarshana meditation with continuous practice, we realize that the asada is of no essence, as opposed to the false view of worth we previously had towards asada, while our mentality was blurred with avidya. When we understand its non-essence, our wisdom has emerged. Then there won't be anything to restrain in sensuality. One would say whatever that meets his eye. There would be no further action beyond that. There would be nothing left to restrain. With refined wisdom, this will become apparent. Then what's the path to follow to bring about this change? One cannot be restraining sensuality with force forever, and frankly, one does not have to do that. Each moment, based on whatever phenomena encountered, one has to diligently practice the Vidarshana. Even before the Lord Buddha's time, many folk tried restraining sensuality. The yogis went into the woods to do that. They might have been restraining themselves not to give in to sensuality, but the moment they saw the narrated flower, a flower which resembled the physique of a woman, they lost all their restraint. Should one strive on this further? Up to now, it has been proved impossible. Why should it be possible now? The Lord Buddha instructed to look into the reality of sensuality, to be freed from the affinity towards sensuality. When the reality is comprehended, the affinity or the blind infatuation would be diminished gradually. One has to learn how to see the reality of sensuality as to what it really is. The Lord Buddha instructed to recall the history with mindfulness, to think about the past sense objects encountered. Then one is able to recall many a past event. There is a misconception regarding this. The mindfulness that the Lord Buddha preached is not present outside the Lord Buddha's dispensation. The Lord Buddha has uttered this about Samma Sati. But it has been falsely pointed out that the ability to recall way into the past as a feature of Samma Sati. Recalling the past events is not anything special. Then the Samma Sati definitely has to be something else. Because even if the Lord Buddha did not come to be, folks would still be able to think of the past, even the non-Buddhists. Then what is expected of the nobles when it comes to the mindful thinking? I have been associating with sensuality in search of pleasure. But what did I yield in my long pursuit of pleasure? Have this internal discussion. Think carefully without leaving anything out. In the past, I have been pursuing desired objects, and I would have been happy when I was able to grasp them. But in what ways did I have to suffer afterwards because of them? What is the root cause of all those suffering? Look into what actually happened in the past with mindfulness. You would realize that anything and everything that was adored, preferred and pursued have ended up yielding pain and suffering. Nothing has ever yielded anything of substance. One has to get used to seeing the truth as it is. Then he would comprehend that he has been pursuing something of non-essence. He would come to think of the essence that he is actually after. With that, what would happen? From this Vidarshana meditation, wisdom would emerge. Afterwards, there would not be the requirement for the restraint of anything. It is like holding diarrhea in. One has to follow proper medication and the diarrhea will be healed. One simply cannot hold diarrhea in. It isn't the proper remedial action. We have an old saying, do not try to hold diarrhea in by wearing diapers. This is the reason for the saying. The solution given is not going to be substantial compared to the magnitude of the problem, and it would not eradicate the problem. Trying to restrain sensuality is such an unwise thing to do. One would not need any diapers if the right medication has been followed and so that the ailment could be properly treated and healed. Suppose one wants to restrain his eye or to acquire discipline to his seeing. It would not be effective if he chooses to walk without looking up to restrain his eye. Once a clergyman came to the Lord Buddha with a question. Venerable Sir, do you teach your disciples how to practice Indriya Bhavana or development of sense faculties? He asked the Lord Buddha. He questioned the Lord Buddha as if he is a very wise person. The Lord Buddha in reply asked, has your teacher taught you how to practice the Indriya Bhavana? Yes, Venerable Sir. He instructed us to stay like a blind person without seeing things from the eye. Stay like a deaf person without hearing sounds from the ear. This is how he has taught us to practice Indriya Bhavana. The Lord Buddha then asked, if that is the case, a blind person would have perfected Indriya Bhavana. A deaf person would have perfect Indriya Bhavana. For a blind person would have never seen a thing from his eye. A deaf person would have never heard a sound from the ear. The clergyman had nothing to say to this comment. By Indriya Bhavana, the Lord Buddha meant the Noble Eightfold Path itself. By perfecting the Indriya Bhavana, the Trivida Sucharita, or the good conduct of mind, word and body is perfected. Satara Satipatthana, or the 4 frames of mindfulness is perfected. Sapta Bojjhanga, or the 7 factors of awakening is perfected. Vidya Vimukti, or the knowledge of the results of the wisdom and liberation, comes to fruition. We start with 1, but it has all the necessary Dhamma compacted within. The Indriya Bhavana includes how to look into the things in terms of anicca, dukkha and anatta. How to see the adinava, or the bad consequences of the worldly things, and how to see the anisansa, or the beneficial consequences of the renunciation, should all be built into the Indriya Bhavana. That is how all subsequent Dhamma is perfected, with 1 Indriya Bhavana. This is Indriya Bhavana uttered by the Lord Buddha. Now is the time for the Blessed One to teach the Indriya Bhavana, requested the Venerable Ananda. From the answer given by the Lord Buddha, we would get to know how to restrain our minds in the face of whatever visual objects encountered with the eye by seeing their reality. They could be adorable, preferred, and highly sensual visual objects. What happens when we see them? If the visual object is something delightful and likable, the mind is yielded with substantial pleasure. The Lord Buddha shows a method on how to respond to this situation encountered based on the eye. What is the course of actions a deluded person would follow? In response, he would pursue the visual stimulus without seeing its reality. From his mind, word, and body, he takes whatever action necessary to yield more of the visual stimuli for viewing pleasure. But what is the Indriya Bhavana that the Lord Buddha wants his disciples to follow to achieve enlightenment? We need to know how to bring to life the samana, or the restraint of the mind, word, and body, by practicing the Indriya Bhavana. Unlike a deluded person, be patient and take time to contemplate its true nature, without readily pursuing the asada. With thoughts, words, and bodily actions, begin an internal discussion. What's this asada that I have just experienced? It has been fabricated through seeing a delightful and likable visual object. Because of what did this asada got fabricated? What was required for it to fabricate? The absence of what would prevent its fabrication? The eye was there to capture the visual objects clearly. An external object came into contact with the eye. There was light, and it provided a medium to capture a sketch of the external visual object through the eye, and is imprinted in the mind. Because of the visual imprint that arose in the mind, the Chakku Vijñāna, or the eye consciousness, has arisen. The Chakku Sampassa, or the sensory contact of the eye, was captured by the mind, and it gave rise to the Vedana, which was cognized by the mind as delightful and likable. Now let's look carefully into the devices used in this course of actions. What was in use? The eye was in use. It captured the rupa, or the visual object. The Chakku Vijñāna aided the process. The Chakku Sampassa that came from that too aided the process. The Vedana, or the sensation that arose from the Sampassa, caused the asada to arise. What is this eye? What is the nature of the eye? The Lord Buddha gave a method to see its nature. Now, this whole process involves a self. There is the idea that I am seeing things. I see things from my eye. I need to grasp that visual object for my consumption. I want it to myself. That is very delightful and likable. I need to have it for my entertainment or to yield asada. I need to go closer to associate with it. Another idea is conceived. There is the idea of me and mine in work here. When I say that I see, who am I referring to as I? And is the I me? Is it appropriate to be called as a part of myself? Where is the beginning of the I? Did it come from the past? Would it go into the future? Would it stay as it is? Then what is its nature? Thus one sees that there is not a self that is coming from the ancient past with regard to the I. Then what is the I? When a baby is conceived inside the womb of a mother, following the mating of its parents, it gains sustenance by absorbing Satara Maha Bhuta, or Patavi Dhatu, Apo Dhatu, Tejo Dhatu, and Vayu Dhatu, from the food eaten by the mother. And it grows little by little, giving rise to the shape of an eye. There is not an eye that comes from the ancient past. It came to be from the interactions of the Satara Mahabhuta inside the mother's womb. Would it remain as it is, their own? Whatever that came to be is nurtured and is grown with more Satara Mahabhuta. The mother exerts effort to eat food to provide sustenance to the developing fetus. It grows by gaining Satara Mahabhuta from the sustenance supplied to the developing fetus. The eye never keeps to my liking, and it emits excretory substances each moment. I am forced to clean it up, but the next morning I would have to wash and clean the eye again. It is not my liking, but it happens in any case. And sometimes eye is inflicted by burning sensations, and I have to keep on blinking to ease off the burning sensation. But incessantly there would be burning sensations. The eye is something of this nature. I do not want it to contract any disease, but it does. I have to follow medication, and sometimes if the medication is conducive, it would heal. And some other times it might not be healed as well. We are forced to keep on supplying the favorable conditions to sustain the eye. But by nature, it is subject to breach. So does it possess anything worthy of being claimed as part of self? Look at the effort that I have to exert just to maintain it. Does it have the capacity to conform to my liking? Thus, it is clear that the eye does not have anything that can be kept to one's liking. We might be seeing some specific instances here and there and call it me and mine. But it has nothing worth to even say that I own it. And what is its end? It has a dependent origination, an origination that is dependent upon many conditions, and it would not stay in good shape forever. It would go into decay little by little, and ultimately would become blind. And by the time the death is near, the eye would be so deteriorated. The eye would not last for long. We might be thinking that it would be there in good shape. There has been nothing worthy of owning in the eye. There has been nothing that could be controlled by myself in the eye. Then what happens in effect? Each moment the eye goes little by little into decay until its eventual demise. We would not be able to save it from destruction, even though we call it me or mine. One cannot keep the eye to his liking. See what has happened to the eye. I used it to do this and that, but it has become useless now. We are trying to own and to be identified with something that we are unable to keep to our liking, at least for a tiny moment. We are trying to connect it to oneself by calling it me and mine, with the view of the ability to use it to yield asada. We cannot be it. We cannot own it. It is something that would go into decay and destruction despite our efforts to keep it the way we like. What am I trying to yield from it? What is the use of this device? The use is to set up a delightful and desirable visual object in contact with the mind in order to create a pleasant sensual emotion. The eye creates an emotion that binds to the world. What does the mind try to do here? It takes the lead to prompt sensory contact for asada. We cannot consume sensuality the way we want. The mind leads us to commit any sort of wrongdoing or immorality to consume sensuality. Where does the mind lead you here? What does the I yield? The I is being led to commit some wrongdoing which will result in woeful rebirths in hell realms for eons to come. We are unable to think of this trap. We are unable to know it as the truth is concealed. Then what does the I give us? It is going to leave us with woeful rebirths in hell realms, with immense suffering that would persist for ages. The I is creating the conditions required for that misfortune to come to life. Conditions that are greatly unfavorable and causing immense degradation. If I pursue these censors and give in to them, what would I inherit? One cannot say when we would be able to escape the animal rebirths. One tiny moment would fabricate all what is needed to sustain the suffering for infinite times to come. One could be reaping the consequences for ages for what has been fabricated in this short time. The mind needs only a split second. Within a blink of an eye, the eye would have captured a visual object, and if it leads to the corruption of the mind, one could be prompted to commit any wrongdoing to get hold of that asada. If a thought is incurred so powerful that one would be prompted to commit any immorality in order to secure the visual object for consumption, the bad energy created so would take uncountable times to repay. But because of the avidya, the truth is concealed. Hence, the cause of suffering is fabricated, giving rise to the suffering and elongating the samsara in the process. We do not know how, but the process takes effect. The I is a device that is dragging us down to meet destruction. So, what is the good the I would yield? This is what the I gives us. This is how we should be studying the adhina, or the bad consequences of the I. What is a visual object? Is it something which I can own? Is it something coming from the ancient past? That too has originated conditionally. If the visual object is another individual, he or she too has emerged in a womb, nurtured by the sustenance coming from the Sattva Dhatu, supplied to the developing fetus. That too cannot be kept to one's liking. That too poses a snare to delude the worldly beings. That is why it was sensed in a delightful and a likable manner to the eye. What is the good this trap would yield unto me? Each moment of seeing would create raga thoughts and induce the mind to commit wrongdoings. Get on to the immoral side, consume sensuality somehow. The mind commands. What has each thought done to us? It has led us to Rupa, that would fabricate woeful rebirths as animals by providing the conducive conditions. In those woeful rebirths, we would have to suffer at each and every passing moment. Then why are we blind to this reality? The five sensuality is a dangerous trap, which has been disguised as delightful and likable with asada. The I and the rupa are two parts of the same trap, working together maliciously. They work in unison, and if we are bound to the samyojana of the fetter they create with chandaraga, a blind infatuation, we are led to grasp sensuality and to consume sensuality. One has to compete with fellow sentient beings. We might be claiming that we are consuming sensuality within morality, but in reality we would be led to the immoral side by fabricating a corrupted mentality. All this time, in the infinite samsara, the eyes we have had did nothing else. Now we are born as humans with a mentality capable of discerning what's going around. Right now, we have got ourselves an eye. But still, if we do not see the truth, the eye and the rupa in unison could be fabricating heaps of corruptions that would lead to woeful rebirths in the four hell realms, that is capable of yielding immense suffering for billions and billions of years to come. Isn't this the true function of the eye? This reality cannot be seen easily. One has to contemplate the reality of the world, has to contemplate the natural order of the worldly phenomena in the way we just discussed. Thereby, we would begin to realize the true nature of the eye. The eye is a fabrication. It has not come from the ancient past. It will not persist into the future without getting harmed. It is a fabrication which has originated conditionally. It will go into the decay and the ultimate demise. But before going into its demise, it would have created a disparaging mind. That too would come to cease, but not before fabricating a mentality that would lead to weak-minded rebirths as animals. Thereby, it would leave us entrapped in dire conditions for ages. They fabricate the cause of suffering before they cease to be. So, there will not be any solace in pursuing the 5 sensual desires that are deemed worthy based on the false conclusions of avidya. The eye is a death trap. The rupa is a death trap. Because of the eye and the rupa, the sentient beings are caught in a death trap. If we are caught in this death trap, we would not be able to be free without paying for it. In the end, we would have fabricated so much of bad karma that would yield us woeful rebirths in the hell realms for eons to come. What good did it serve? This is what the eye yielded. This is what the rupa yielded. From their unison, they fabricated shackles that would bind us to the samsara. The Lord Buddha instructed us to follow this investigation. Why the worldlings are unable to lead their minds into this investigation is because they had no one to show the way. The Lord Buddha came to the world and showed us the reality of things. This is the true nature of the worldly phenomena that you considered likable and delightful. See what they really are, he preached. The coming of a Lord Buddha is so very rare. He would teach us the reality of the rupa and the eye. We have to make full use of this rare opportunity that we have been given. We have to look into the reality of things if we want to get ourselves liberated. This is the word of the Lord Buddha and his Dhamma. The sensuality leads to more problems, one after the other, and it is impossible to escape the problems by keep on pursuing sensuality. Make full use of this rare opportunity and start seeing the reality of the worldly phenomena. With that, you would understand the Dhamma that you have never understood in this infinite samsara. Pubbē ananusatesu dhammesu chakkung udapāde. Vision arose with regard to the Dhamma that was never heard before. What is this Dhamma? We realize the reality of the eye, which we consider to be delightful, likable, and good. We realize the reality of the rupa, which we consider to be delightful, likable, and good. During this infinite samsara, we have concluded on a false reality deluded by the avidya. We had no way of knowing the truth. We had never heard Dhamma. We had not contemplated in terms of Dhamma. The day we contemplate the true nature of things in terms of Dhamma, we would see the truth, and we are incurred with the vision with regard to the Dhamma that was never heard before. The Dhamma eye arises, allowing us to see the truth as it is. With that, we can realize that the eye is subject to anicca, dukkha and anatta. The rupa is subject to anicca, dukkha and anatta. The chakku vijnana, or the eye consciousness, is subject to anicca, dukkha and anatta. Chakku sampassa, or the sensory contact of the eye, is subject to anicca, dukkha, anatta. Chakku sampassa vedana, or the visual sensation, is subject to anicca, dukkha, anatta. If one is bound with chandaraga, or the blind infatuation, it should be to one of these 5 places. If there was any upadana or clinging, it should be to one of these 5 places. Similarly, we had to look into the reality of the ear, nose, tongue, body and the mind. And we had to see how the mind would pursue sensuality. The ear have 5 places similar to those of the eye. The sentient beings are being deluded because of the sota or ear, sound, sota vijnana, sota sampassaja vedana. The sentient beings bind themselves with tanha or craving to these 5 places. The sentient beings have upadana in gana or nose, or the gana vijnana, gana sampassaja vedana. They bind themselves with tanha to these 5 places. Thus they have upadana or clinging towards worldly existence and suffering. The sentient beings are deluded by the asada generated from jivha or tongue. Taste, jivha vijnana, jivha sampassaja vedana. They bind themselves with tanha to these 5 places. Thereby they fabricate the course towards the infinite samsaric suffering. The sentient beings are being deluded by the asada generated from kaya or body. Touch, kaya vijnana, kaya sampassaja vedana. They bind themselves with chandaraga or blind infatuation to these 5 places. They have this upadana or clinging based on the kaya. The sentient beings have upadana or clinging in mana or mind. Mental objects, mano vijnana, mano sampassaja vedana. Upadana pacca bhava, bhava pacca jati, jati pacca jara marana, shoka parideva, dukkha domanasa upayasa sambhavanti. If there is upadana in some place, we cannot escape the suffering that follows. We would be subjected to them. Hence, there are 30 places where we could have upadana. If we have seen the truth of these 30 places, we would be able to stop upadana from arising. Upadana nirodha, bhava nirodho, bhava nirodha, jati nirodho, jati nirodha, jara marana, shoka parideva, dukkha domanasa, upayasa nirujjanti. Everything is ceased from arising. This is the indriya bhavana, or the development of sense faculties. One cannot restrain sensuality, but one has to see the truth. One cannot avoid senses, but has to see the reality of sensuality. When one is able to see the visual objects without getting deluded by it, by seeing the reality of the visual objects in terms of Dhamma, he would be freed from nivarana, or the 5 hindrances. When the nivarana are removed, the reality becomes apparent. A mind that is contemplating Dhamma, freed from nivarana, is incurred with prajna, or wisdom. The Dhamma is definitely the truth. because it is based on the cause and effects relationship. When the Dhamma is contemplated, the prajna would come to life as a result. Once the truth is realized, all the attachments, bindings would cease to be. Let the eye see whatever seen, let the ear hear whatever heard. Whatever you are, your mind has no grasping in any of the places. If there was some past Chandaraga or blind infatuation, it would no longer be there. If there is some prevailing binding process with Chandaraga, it would soon be over. The life goes on. Only the course of actions required to maintain life takes place. There will be no more allurement and binding to things from the sense faculties. To sustain the body until death, he would eat and drink. It is not possible to keep going while being hungry or thirsty, because he wants to be safe from mosquitoes, flies, cold and warmth. He would wear some clothes as appropriate. He would be in a house, as it is not possible to be living in the rain. He would work to earn a living, to maintain the supply of food. He would do all these not because they are good, but because of the necessity, without any blind infatuation. He would complete his noble path and would die someday. Afterwards, the samsaric journey will have been ended. This is the method of effecting it. He would do what is necessary. He wouldn't live in seclusion, hiding from the world. He does not need to be in isolation to avoid looking at anyone. There was a time this might have been required, prior to the times of the Lord Buddha. The yogis did such things. Their morality ended when they saw the narilata flower, a flower which resembled the physique of a woman. The Buddhist practice is samadha. It can be practiced while living in the society, fulfilling the day-to-day duties, and while nurturing the families, parents, helping out the relatives, discharging the duties and responsibilities as civilized citizens. But there would be no desire to live. He is not living to do good, but he does some good while he is alive. Without any Chandaraga, he would be freed from life. With death, he would be freed from the suffering of the samsara. This is the Buddhism. It isn't something that should be practiced in seclusion. Understand this thoroughly. So what about the restraint of sensual thoughts now? Is it relevant? There is nothing to restrain. The sensual thoughts would be restrained if we would follow this method. We do not have to strive for it exclusively. Understand this Dhamma and get used to thinking along these lines regularly.
වහරක Thera Waruna Wajrāsana.
The undefilable Dhamma.